We're in for a special treat this afternoon. First of all, good afternoon. Welcome to Open Learning of AJU, the American Jewish University. And I want to welcome in particular our author, Michelle Young, who has written a wonderfully interesting book called The Art Spy. And she's going to hold it up. And when you finish, I know you're going to want to buy The Art Spy and read it. It makes for fascinating reading. Let me begin in a very bizarre way for a moment, which is that there was a lousy New York detective series on television called The Naked City. And The Naked City had one good line that people of my generation remember, which is the last line of the television series is there are 8 million people in this naked city, 8 million stories, and this has been one of them. If we think back to both the Holocaust and World War II, there are millions of stories to be told. And what Michelle has done exceedingly well is to tell one such story. So I'm going to first ask you, Michelle, tell us a little bit about your own background and how you got into this, and then we'll tease them for a moment because we're not going to tell the story for another couple of minutes, just so you get intrigued by what's about to happen.
Yeah, well, I am from New York, the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants, and my interest in World War II really stems initially from my own family's history. My grandfather survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. He was a Taiwanese student, not Japanese, but Taiwan was occupied by China, by Japan, and he was sent over as a teenager to Hiroshima. So this obviously has made a mark on my entire family, and I had been interviewing him for many years since I was a child about his experience in that episode. And then I had the good luck, bad luck to marry somebody French, and I decided I would deep dive into European World War II history as well, which I always enjoyed growing up studying it. And through that, I sort of fell into this subgenre of female spies, World War II true story books, and then discovered my heroine, Rose Valland, in a book by Jonathan Petropoulos called Goring's Man in Paris. And she appeared every few chapters there as the nemesis to Goring's art dealer in Paris in the Jeu de Paume Museum next to the Louvre. And I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of her. And I had a hunch once I saw the bare outlines that were known of her life and her wartime life that I bet that her wartime story was much more exciting than was in the record. And so I set about hoping to write her wartime story as a narrative nonfiction book, which became The Art Spy.
So let's circle around it for a moment. Tell us a little bit about the what shall we say, the attempt to of the Germans to loot French art.
Yes.
And also a little bit about the rivalry of Hitler and Goring with regard to this. And then we'll get to our heroine.
Yeah, so I think we need to start with Hitler's time in Austria. In his late teens, he desperately wanted to go to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. He's rejected twice, once for the painting and fine art side, once for architecture. And this is the time period that he starts to formulate his virulent anti-Semitic theories. He starts to believe that there is a Viennese cabal in control of culture in the city that has prevented him from becoming the artist he's meant to be. And he spends many years virtually penniless, living on park benches and homeless shelters and churning out what he calls derivative paintings for tourists. And all of this and more end up in Mein Kampf. And in tandem to that is his hatred of modern art, because this is the 1920s and 30s. We are seeing the rise of avant-garde modern painters and sculptors.
Let me just add one thing about Vienna. Vienna was a city in which Jews were enormously prevalent and enormously present. This was the city of Freud. It was the city of tremendous Jewish participation in the cultural life, but it's also a city that understood that anti-Semitism could be a significant political tool. And that
That's right.
is,
So some of the early mayors and leaders in Austria utilized that. It was an early example of using anti-Semitism to power a base of dissatisfied voters and racist voters. And so Hitler is growing up in this time listening to these theories of some of these politicians and looking at the landscape and coming with these ideas, right? He sees them in the newspaper industry, literature, and in the arts. And I mean, you can read Mein Kampf. It's harrowing to read. And so in tandem with these concepts, he develops also a hatred for modern art, which is also a lot of the Jewish art collectors all over Europe have started to specialize and collect artists like Picasso and Braque and the German expressionists. And so it all becomes tied together. And in the 1930s, the Nazis begin to seize art, modern art from museums, and they do all sorts of things with it, including burning them and putting them on display as an example of Germany's cultural decline. And they sell them. There's a major auction that I cover in the book.
they had an exhibition they called Degenerate Art.
Degenerate art and
And
Tartakovsky.
if you wanted to make a fortune, you would have bought anything that they regarded as degenerate,
That's
and
right.
you would have a wonderful art collection for the ages.
Yes. And so at the same time, they're also sending emissaries into countries like France, art historians secretly there, to start making lists of artwork they believe belong to Germany. So this includes artwork looted by and plundered by Napoleon, artwork they had been forced to give up in the Treaty of Versailles, which they believed was inherently unfair. And later, of course, this expands to include anything Germanic, but at this time, it's a list quite extensive already. And then they also have a list in France of the 15 major art dealers in Paris, and these are predominantly Jewish art collectors.
Jews.
And so in any country they went to, they set up shop, government ruling wise, and they immediately began looting art as well. Those two things are really tied together and in tandem. And in addition to starting to put restrictions on the Jewish population. So one of the early things in France was that anyone who had a collection or piece of art worth more than 100,000 francs, I believe, was to report that and file it with the Kommandantur. And of course, later would follow having to register yourself and provide your address within France. So within a week or so, starting in early July, they liquidated all 15 of these art galleries and moved it into,
So let's put it in context.
yeah,
We're talking about 1940, which is very, very early on
hmm
in this. So that would sense that they knew they were going to capture France, and they had a plan to,
yes,
what shall we say, weaken, destroy, shatter, transform, change, French culture and enhance German dominance. So
yeah, that's right.
I
I mean,
want to
even
make clear how early in the game this is.
yes, that first summer, even in the landscape of Paris, the signs turn German. Places are said for German soldiers only. The currency changes. So really, it's a full occupation in a real traditional sense.
So continue. So they close the galleries, and what then follows?
Yeah. So there's actually for a period a rivalry that occurs between the Germans and France, who all want in on the looting game, and the Germans actually still in Germany as well. So Ribbentrop wants art, Goring wants art. Alfred Rosenberg is actually not too interested in art, but interested in documents that can provide research into Germany's enemies. So he's looting more so libraries and archives, and other players are all fighting each other, including the German army leadership. So there's a period of this happening, and one player emerges dominant, and that's Alfred Rosenberg's group. But in fact, Alfred Rosenberg is somewhat politically weak, and so Hermann Göring is really calling the shots within this organization called the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR. And by November 1940,
And Göring is the number two to Hitler.
correct, Göring has already been decided pre-occupation that he is Hitler's number two should anything happen to him. And so by October 1940, the German ambassador, Otto Abetz, the ambassador to France, has lost his attempt to control the looting operation. And so the German military force the removal of all the art he has looted from the 15 major art galleries. They must be removed to the Louvre to be in control under the military. But then the looting continues. They have more, they're going down the list essentially, more and more collectors. And they run out of space in those rooms in the Louvre. So they request with the French National Museums. You have to remember also that this is not, we have an armistice, but not a peace treaty. And so they're still nominally have to deal with Vichy, who's in control of the museums in France. So they request with the museum in France a standalone building where they can move their looted art into. And this standalone building turns out to be the museum that this woman, Rose Valland, already has worked in. She's been there since 1932.
And now, well, let's touch on one more thing.
Mhm.
There was a rivalry as to who stole most and who got the best. As the Germans were looting, they were pulling rank on one another. And Göring was a very high rank, but somebody ranked a little bit higher than Göring.
Yes, of course. Hitler was the Führer, so he always got first choice. But Hitler actually wanted the best. So, as opposed to Göring, who was a gluttonous character. So Göring wanted the
By the way,
most.
physically gluttonous as well.
That's correct.
Göring weighed hundreds and hundreds of pounds. He was also addicted to Percocet and
And morphine and
kept consuming them in vast quantities. So eating, drinking, everything. Gluttonous is probably a wonderful word by which to describe him.
Yeah,
With an insatiable appetite for many things.
that's correct. There's a great little anecdote in the book which describes his visits, Göring's visits to the Ritz Hotel on his future shopping trips, which we'll get to, for art. And he had a morphine addiction that he had gotten from the First World War, where he was a flying ace. And he would have to get the morphine administered through shots in his bathtub, and he was too large, so they had custom installed a bathtub in the Ritz for him, and towels and champagne, and all things were being constantly delivered. So.
Okay, now let's introduce our heroine.
Yes, so Rose Valland, she comes from a small countryside village, 40 miles southeast of Lyon. And she has an unprecedented, really unpredicted rise from this town as the daughter of a blacksmith to the pinnacle of fine arts in France. So she goes to better and better schools thanks to her mother's diligence in applying for scholarships for her to go to boarding schools, ends up at the École des Beaux-Arts, first in Lyon, where she wins a host of awards, national and regional, and ends up then at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, so where all the major French artists have studied. And she does well there, very well there as well, and then enrolls to get graduate degrees at the École du Louvre, which is a place that trains future curators and art historians, but she's also studying at the Sorbonne and another university. So you get the idea. She's very dedicated to the study and the production of art. She's a painter. She can draw. That's what she's studying at the École des Beaux-Arts. But unfortunately, she hits some roadblocks at the École du Louvre. The head is a man named Henri Verne. He's the head of the school, but also the head of the Louvre and all of the French national museums. And he is a rival to her mentor, Henri Faucillon. He is a real traditionalist, and Faucillon and Rose both have avant-garde ideas. Although if I told you what her thesis was, it wouldn't sound avant-garde today. But she was studying the study of movement in Italian art from Renaissance to today. But at this time, art history was considered the study of a static image. So the idea that you would study movement within an image was quite revolutionary. And Henri Verne, a very traditionalist, not actually an art historian or anything himself, found this obviously quite disturbing. And so he gives her a very bad grade on her thesis, which hampers her opportunity to get a job. And anytime someone asks for a recommendation, he writes very nasty lines about Rose and how she shouldn't be hired. And so,
And he is, what shall we say, the most powerful man in the French art world.
yes, so even the head of the Beaux-Arts system looking to hire Rose has to send a letter to him to ask what his opinion is. So she loses out on all these jobs. And she ends up taking a job as an unpaid secretary in the Jeu de Paume Museum, which is a fledgling museum. It opens its own building that year, 1932, and it's a museum focused on the modern international schools of art. So they're doing wonderful exhibitions, but specific to different countries. So the modern art of Argentina, Latvia, Spain, Germany, Austria, you name it, even America. They did a big exhibition with MoMA called 3 Centuries of American Art. And so she really, as an unpaid secretary, helps to build this museum into the renown it is by the war. And she's able to, through a lot of effort, transform her job after 4 years into an unpaid curatorial assistant. But when World War II breaks out and the Germans arrive in 1940, she's actually still unpaid. And she's
How's she,
really
how is
hustling.
how's she supporting herself?
Yeah, so she's applying for scholarships for her studies, which gives her some money, but she's really in the modern day term hustling. So she is teaching French, she's teaching art, she's working as an art broker. She's actually in the provenance of Juan Gris paintings, a Leger painting, Alfred Gleise's. So she's using her contacts through the museum world to do some deals. And she's writing as a freelance journalist about art exhibitions for publications all over France. So she's making ends meet. Oh, she also gives tours of art museums. So she's making ends meet somehow, but she's obviously struggling. And in France during this time, it's assumed that if you are a woman who wants to work in the arts, you will have a husband that will support you. And within the pool of very few women who worked for the museums at this time, they are unpaid. But one of them, for example, is married to a famous sculptor in France. So she gets the job because she doesn't need a salary. But Rose is not married. She is, in addition, lesbian, and she's been living with her partner, Joyce here, a British citizen, since the mid 1930s. And so she's in a really different position than the normal type of woman that would come and seek a job at the Louvre. Where should we go next?
Well, let's follow the story through.
So November 1940, the Germans arrive to her museum, and her boss, Jacques Jaujard, her new boss, head of the museums of France, orders her to, quote, stay at all costs inside the Jeu de Paume Museum. And she does this for the next 4 years at great risk to her own life. And so at the beginning, she's just trying to figure out what's happening.
Well, when
And yeah,
let's stop there for a second. When he orders her,
yeah,
he clearly has something in mind, which is
yes, because
the appearance of cooperation without cooperation.
yeah, that's
Sort
correct.
of
So the museums,
walking a thin
Jacques
line.
Jaujard and the museums already know about the looting that's happening. Maybe not the full extent, but they know it's happening and they're concerned. And so it's believed that he offers up the Jeu de Paume Museum because it works for the Germans. They want a standalone building in which people can't peer in to see what's happening. It has truck access, but he also knows that he has someone placed there who can spy on the Germans. And so every few days, she goes and reports to him what's happening. But right away, it's very clear that there's a hustle and bustle of activity. And one of the things she tries to figure out is why. And she learns because she actually can read and understand some German because her partner is half German, that someone very important is coming. And so a few days later, Hermann Göring arrives for the first of his 20 quote unquote shopping trips to shop for art, which he never actually pays for, but he tries to, he pretends he's going to be above board about it. And these are elaborate exhibitions that are put on, just like you would curate a museum for an exhibition, and they would add carpets and palm plants and saber bottles of champagne and serve the champagne. There was a lot of pomp and circumstance involved in his visits, and this first one is, of course, no exception. Might be the most important visit, and so she documents and tries to figure out who the players are. That's her first stage of spycraft.
And let me emphasize one thing, that this is the middle of the war. The
Mhm.
Nazis are expanding all over the place. Goring is the number two man. He's got a country that he's running. He's got an air force that he's involved in. He's got a whole range of things, and his side hobby, but really part of his obsession, is to add to his art collection.
Yes, he's
So
got
he,
many homes to fill, including one called Karen Hall, which is a huge hunting estate, and he calls it, the Versailles of Germany, I suppose. And he needs to fill that with artwork, preferably of the kind that Hitler likes, which are the old masters, so Vermeers and Rembrandts and Hans Holbein. And that is predominantly the type of art that is being searched for and valued at this time.
tell us a little bit more about Rose.
So Rose, she she improves her spycraft over time, and you can see this. I had access to not only all of her wartime reports, but I located many more that were not in the official record. They were in her office files, and I was also given access through her family to hundreds of letters and postcards and you name it, her personal effects. And so over time, she starts to improve her spycraft. So she starts to make duplicate copies of keys and safes in the building. She steals documents out of the garbage cans, brings them home, reproduces them. She also steals photographic negatives, prints them somewhere overnight, and puts them back carefully in the files the next day. And she really starts to understand the dynamic that's happening, where the art is looting from, and also get some allies on her side. So she's already known the guards in the building. They're all Corsican and World War One vets, and so she gets them to give her information or help bring her around the museum to areas where it would seem a little suspicious for her to go to. And she learns to play a role that she already had in herself, which is to subsume her identity and appear to be someone she wasn't. So not being on the payroll was also helpful because it made it appear that she was sort of this custodian character that liaison with the guards, that understood how the building worked, and that she could circulate on the pretext of checking the fire system and checking the electrical system and making sure the building was in tip-top shape.
Now,
So,
let's ask for a moment about her motivation. Her motivation is really to preserve the cultural traditions of France.
yeah, so
It's less a political opposition to the Nazis or to the Germans in this case than it is a cultural opposition. You're taking our stuff.
yeah,
You're taking our history.
it's a little bit of both, but I believe her main motivation is really this idea of preserving the beauty of the world. That's actually one of her phrases, that she did it. She did all that she did to preserve a little of the beauty that was left in this world. And I believe that for her, art, the making of it, the study of it, was her escape from a very traditional conservative background from rural France that allowed her to go to go to Paris and pursue a career there. And she's very driven by this idea of art protection and, of course, France's cultural patrimony. But one of the things I discovered in my research was an unpublished chapter of her memoir. Her memoir is unfortunately very dry. It's like an academic thesis about art looting. And this chapter was cut out, and it was about her escape from Paris in June 1940 as the Germans have invaded. And she's very loath to leave. And we have many letters of her pleading with her boss and the boss's boss that she wants to stay in Paris no matter what to protect the art collection that remains in the Jeu de Paume Museum. And and I'll let you guys discover her very harrowing journey. But at one point, she comes across a woman who has gone crazy. And inside a baby carriage next to this woman are two dead children. And she writes that this is the moment in which she decided she would fight back in any means possible against the occupiers. So traditionally, it's been known that she did this for the art, and that's what she has said publicly. But through discovering this chapter, I learned, another layer to her motivations. She was very angry about what the Germans had done to her country and to the culture and the art as well.
And take us through to her moment of a great achievement. Bring
Well,
us.
there are a few, right? But
Well,
I think many people may have known of Rose potentially through a Burt Lancaster film called The Train. And this was a movie actually optioned off of one partial chapter of the book. And I also had the honor of actually reading her communications with the Hollywood screenwriters. So that was fascinating, even
oh,
though it takes place after the main action of the book. It's in the epilogue. But she becomes quite well known post-war, particularly after her memoir and this movie come out. And it is about the last train of art that the Germans are hoping to move out of France. And it's in Paris. There's 1,000 paintings on it by Monet, Picasso, the like. You name it, it's on this train. 50 sculptures. And in addition to that, 47 other rail cars of stolen Jewish furniture and household items. So when we say that they were moving and stealing, they were taking literally everything, down to the decoration panels. And for example, in an apartment, they would strip that and loot that. And she had been concerned for many weeks about this last train, and she managed to get her hands on the shipping manifests for this train and saw the series of letters and numbers which indicated to her that it was moving by train. And she was very excited about this because if it had moved by truck to Germany, it would be driven by German soldiers and perhaps dispersed. It would be multiple trucks. If it moved by train, it would mean that it would have to go on the SNCF, the French rail service. The conductors would be French, and the staff and the train service would be in charge of moving this train out.
let me point out, being the nasty scholar of the Holocaust, this is same French rail service that is deporting the Jews. Uh,
Exactly. Exactly. And it was an agreement with Germany that the train system would remain run by the French, but as a result, they are complicit in the deportation. And I write about this as well because it's important to mention. I had a critique from a French editor, in fact, who said, why is there need to mention that? And of course, from a scholarly perspective, you can't give praise to the French rail service for saving this train without addressing the fact that they deported the Jewish population from France. And
You can say they saved the art, but they didn't save their
exactly, as a scholar, as an academic, as a journalist, you can't portray one side better when the facts are there. And so Rose then reaches out both to her boss, Jacques Chaujar, who's working with the resistance through London, Charles de Gaulle's resistance, but Rose has a direct contact as well in the French resistance within France and who liaisons with the rail service. And so she tries every measure possible to try to sabotage and stop this train. And well, I don't know if I should reveal what happens, but it's a very exciting episode of daring and real courage on behalf of everyone involved in trying to save this train.
Now, many Americans or many of the people on this will be familiar to Monuments Men, which I guess is again what shall we say, a glorified depiction of the type of struggle to maintain the cultural material that was being looted. How does this compare, as it were? This is really Monuments Men is after liberation.
Yeah, so this is really the story before the Monuments Men. And in fact, Rose gives her intelligence after really figuring out whether she can trust the Allies with what she knows. And it takes so long that both the French and the Americans get very concerned because they know, of course, that the Allies are going to move further and further into Germany. Where is all the art that has been looted throughout Europe? Where is it being stored? And they know that Rose has this information. And so the French suggest to the Americans, try to get her trust. She doesn't trust us in France. She thinks everything she collected is going to end up on a desk somewhere, hampered by bureaucracy. And so this one man, James Rorimer, he's the director of the Met Museum, responsible for the construction of the cloisters. He went to high school in Paris. He speaks French and is very much of a very similar mindset to Rose in the sense that he's just very truly passionate about art and is not a political creature. And he is sent to gain her trust, and slowly she decides she can trust him and that he is the man who should go to Germany to save the artwork. And she instructs him before he's even given the orders, you must go to Germany, James. You are the only one who can save the artwork in Germany before the Germans destroy it themselves. They're very concerned that the Germans will bomb their own art storage facilities, which are in mines and in castles, so that nobody else can get their hands on it. So she's the woman before them, the woman before the men.
Après moi le déluge.
The what?
Après moi le déluge.
Oh,
Afterwards.
yeah. That's correct.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your experience uncovering all of this.
Yeah. So,
What surprised you the most? Because
well,
you're really doing several things. You're writing a biography. You're unraveling a mystery, doing a lot of detective work.
Yes, it was 100% just like detective work. And actually, I was giving a talk in the last week since the launch. I've been at a different city every day, basically. And someone came up to me and she said, I'm a former police officer. And what you did is just like police work. And it's really how I approached it, whether it was digging into Rose's personal life, which was very unknown before. I treated it like a missing persons investigation and tried to track down everything I could, from mundane documents to speaking to the family, of course, and piecing together her life, the life of a very private, non-public figure. And then with the stuff about Rose,
By the way, we should let's always say our vision of spies is established by James Bond type of
yeah.
thing. Spies normally want to be very quiet, very behind the scenes, don't want to be observed, don't want to be seen, don't want to be known, don't want to make a fuss. They call very little attention to themselves.
Yeah.
And when you say very private, precisely that.
Yeah. And so, in a way, parts of Rose's story, there's too much information, right? Because they're the records that exist through the French National Museums that are not just about her, but all about the art protection and the looting and everything that happened in the war. We have all her papers that are left behind, the reports and such that she left behind in her office, and she would keep everything. You can imagine just like a pack rat with stacks and stacks of things. And then, but all those documents reveal very little about Rose as a person, her emotions, and what she thought, because she was an academic and she was very focused on proving the mechanism in which the Nazis looted art in France and wanting to prevent it from happening again. So her memoir is about this, her papers are about this. And so I worked closely with Rose Valland's family, really the descendant of her close cousin, and they gradually revealed more and more personal letters, personal papers, personal documents. And so every 6 months, I would go to France, continue the research I was doing in the various archives that have information about Rose, but then also looking through new material. So anything quoted in the book is truly has been said. It comes from interviews she's given, letters she's written to her family, to other people, letters that her family has written. All of that was required to bring her to life in a new way. And finally, it was in the editing process, I went and looked back at a lot of the source material because I had gotten to know her so well by that point. You know, this book took me 4 years. And so I understood then, rereading a lot of her material, that in some cases she was actually being quite emotional. But on first reading it, it feels like almost a factual recounting. But I could tell with the types of words she used that she was being adamant about something more than I thought initially. And so really a careful reading and looking through scribbles and random pieces of paper she left behind, really just being very extensive about the research.
Michelle, let me turn to some questions by
Sure.
our participants here. I don't want to
Mhm.
call them an audience, but the people who are with us.
Yeah.
Can you, somebody tell us a little bit more about the source used in your research and what kind of ideas and items, where did you go? How did you begin this?
Yeah, so my first stop was at the French National Archives. That's where the French Museum archives are located. It's just north of Paris. And beautiful building, a lot of material there, especially about the art looting. Then the French diplomatic archives have her office papers. So this is mostly post-war things, drafts of her book. Then there is the Musée de la Résistance in Grenoble, which is not too far from her hometown. They have many of her personal effects that have been gradually given by the family. Then I met Rose's family, Joyce's family, some people I was supposed to meet in her hometown. One of them actually died very shortly after I was supposed to meet her. She had a pulmonary embolism the day I was supposed to meet her. So I didn't get to speak to her, but the Rose Valland Association is a repository of firsthand accounts of people that knew her, etc. And in the US, many places here, actually. So the US Archives has information and reports by Rose, but also Joyce's story because she worked for the US Embassy. So I combed through every communication that went in and out of the US Embassy during the war to search for Joyce. And she did appear 5, 6 times. And then I could source the original documents. that referred to that. Joyce was actually arrested and put on the same train cars we talked about. She was arrested by the Germans and interned as a British citizen, as an enemy alien. So that part was fascinating. And then a lot of firsthand journals. Some of them are unpublished, some of them are published, that I got my hands on to really bring to life what was life like in Paris and in Europe during this time. And I should mention, which I haven't mentioned, is that there's a secondary storyline in this book that's not Rose's story, but about the Jewish art collector Paul Rosenberg and his family. And they managed to escape to New York during the early part of the war as the Germans are invading France. But Rose's story and Paul's story, and especially his son Alexander's story, intersect in a very improbable way, which I want you to discover in the book as well. But so being able to tell the story of one family, one Jewish family, gives you a sense of the personal impact that art looting had. So it's not just a list of documents, a list of artists that came through and were looted. And, a book like that could have just lists and lists of the amount of art that was stolen. But my question was, in every part of the story, how did this affect an individual going through the war at this time? And so in terms of the Rosenbergs, they gave their archives to MoMA, but I also tracked down
That's
communication.
for
Museum of
the
Modern Art. Yes.
Museum of Modern Art.
Museum of Modern Art, but I was given access to the homes that they lived in France to get a sense of the spaces that they were in, and multiple other archives in which they communicated with. So the Matisse archives, all the artists in which Paul was writing letters to. So I was able to then put together, as a storyline that continues through the book, the Rosenberg family's plight in World War II.
Did you follow at all the repatriation of artworks to their Jewish owners?
Yes, of course I came across that. This book, again, is called narrative nonfiction. So I meant it to look at the wartime period. You're meant to be immersed. It reads like a thriller or a novel. That's the genre that this is in. But, I had over 2,000 endnotes, which I had to cut down. Everything is sourced down to the adjectives that are used. But what was your original question? Actually, I lost it.
Did you follow the
Oh,
repatriation?
Yes. So inevitably, going through all of Rose's documents, there's so much about that time period. And she really worked tirelessly. She was in Germany for about 8 years post-war, working on the sorting and the repatriation. And then I read through many of the letters in which she communicated with Jewish families in France about the returning of the art, many really laudatory letters sent by families like the Rothschilds and the Rosenbergs, talking about how they appreciated her efforts to continue fighting for the art that had been stolen from them. And I do hope that someone will look into her post-war life in details. Parts of it are very exciting. She would track down art. She went to Goring's house and actually reburied his wife because the Russians had desecrated her grave. She went in as a fake journalist to the Russian zone and actually managed to repatriate the cannons from the Invalides and a bunch of flags from the Invalides. And she had to really almost send a commando unit because they tried to move it so she wouldn't know where it was. And she got them back, or lions that Goring had stolen, stone lions. So that part is also really exciting. And I do cover it in the epilogue of the book, but maybe someone will want to dig into her post-war life in Germany deeper.
Let's again say The
Mhm.
Art Spy by Michelle Young.
Yes.
And I want you to know that not only is it informative, but it is interesting from beginning to end. We thank you, Michelle. We wish you well on the book.
Thank you so
You
much.
did a whale of a job in research, and the other part of it that I keep thinking is how much of this art ended up in different types of museums without attribution to its provenance. But
That's
that's
an
for
ongoing thing. Yeah, and I've been writing quite extensively about several cases of Jewish owned artwork that has come to light, families that are still fighting for it. I've met the heirs, and it's always a moving story about not only how the art was looted, but their quest to get it restituted. And of course, it's in my experience, it has never been about money. It is just about what is the right thing to do.
Well,
And
for me, for some art collectors, it's really about possessing the treasure.
yeah, and these are so many things were collected for personal reasons. They just became
Yeah.
valuable later. But so many, the Rosenbergs are still looking for drawings that Picasso did of his family. Just they live next door to each other. And so he would sketch, and those are gone. They have not been found. And it's believed that around 100,000 pieces of artwork haven't been found of the Jewish looted art collections.
Well, we have to thank you very much. We wish you well
Thank you
on the
so
book.
much.
Let me just say that we have another session next week with Menachem Rosensoft. It's going to be called The Burning Psalms. And if you're interested in the question of how do you pray to the God that you don't believe in, and how do you deal with evil in the world in which we live, stay tuned for next week. Look forward to seeing you. Thank you again, Michelle. Much
Yes,
appreciated.
thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Bye-bye.